What's up, Flannerers? Neil Orfield here to do a quick breakdown of the Saturday two-game slate for DraftKings. Texans and Chargers, Ravens and Packers. We have two of the four quarterbacks were the starters coming into the year. So right on cue, right on schedule with the rest of the NFL games we watched so far this year. Seems like it's going to be a trend that holds up. About half the starting quarterbacks are out this week. Kind of a wild one, but we're going to break it down position by position as usual, starting with quarterbacks and running backs, receivers, tight ends. Maybe I'll talk a little defenses. Probably won't do a separate section on showdown. I'll try to remember to mention if I think a player is a particularly good showdown play as I go. I'm going to try to keep this one fairly short because I've got a lot to do today, but I'm going to do my best to do a full breakdown of this two-game slate. And again, I'll be starting with quarterbacks. While you're coming in, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate all of your support this year, getting me to 6,000 subscribers, already reaching the goal, but also hoping to continue growing the channel up to 7,000. So could continue to use your support. Thanks. And a reminder, if you don't already know, you can use promo code NEIL to get 50% off your first payment on any NFL product at Run the Sims. If you have not already checked out Run the Sims, highly recommend checking it out. There's also a link in the description of this video to get to the checkout page. We only recently got the news that we're going to have Malik Willis starting for the Packers. So I'm not going to be able to run the Sims with the data being correct. So I'm just going to be giving you the information that I have and using Roto-Grinder's numbers to talk about ownership, projections, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to do my best, starting with the quarterbacks: Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud, Malik Willis, and Tyler Huntley. In terms of the matchups, Tyler Huntley has the best matchup. It's the 13th best matchup for quarterbacks in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position over the past 5 weeks. Malik Willis has the second best matchup, the 15th best matchup for quarterbacks over the past 5 weeks, schedule adjusted. Much tougher matchups in the other game, the Chargers versus the Texans. Justin Herbert has the 6th worst matchup for quarterbacks in terms of schedule adjusted, and CJ Stroud has the 2nd worst matchup for quarterbacks, schedule adjusted. In terms of pass rate over expectation on the season, the Chargers rank 8th, the Texans rank 9th, so both, well above average in terms of pass rate over expectation. And then the second game, we have kind of the opposite. Packers rank 20th and the Ravens rank 31st, but it's probably even worse because we have backup quarterbacks in. The expectation would be that they are going to run the ball even more than usual. You saw it in the most recent game. Malik Willis took over, and the Packers have a negative 7.8% pass rate over expectation. The Ravens with Tyler Huntley, negative 16.3% pass rate over expectation in week 16. I think we expect that to continue. They're just not going to be a pass first team. They're going to try to lean on the run. Justin Herbert, 6,000, CJ Stroud, 5,300, Malik Willis, 5,000, and Tyler Huntley, 4,800. So just a $1,200 difference between the three of them. And the projection difference also not that huge. Looks like it's just a little over 2 here at Roto-Grinders. Now, other places I've seen the projection difference being a bit of a bigger split, where it's like a greater than 4 fantasy point difference between Justin Herbert and Tyler Huntley. And the big split actually comes with just Tyler Huntley. Other places I've seen him projected well below the other three on this slate. Ownership also is going to be very dependent on where you look. As of right now at Roto-Grinders, looks like Tyler Huntley would be projected for about 30% ownership if you remove the other three. Whereas other places I've seen Tyler Huntley at single-digit ownership. My guess is that that is closer to correct, and that currently, Roto-Grinders is not giving him a projected ownership. I think that's because they are rerunning things, so we just don't have a good ownership projection right now on Huntley at Roto-Grinders. But my expectation would be that Tyler Huntley is going to be the lowest owned of the quarterbacks on the slate. Now, again, using ownership projections from elsewhere, I think Justin Herbert probably comes in a bit higher than the 30% he's projected for here. Not by a ton, and I think that he's fine. I mean, Justin Herbert is, I think, the most talented quarterback on this slate. The most likely, if any of them have a real chance at like 30 fantasy points, I think Justin Herbert would have the best chance. But it's not my expectation for him in this game. Again, playing against this Texans defense, he's a talented enough quarterback that I think he can put up a big game on anybody. But this would be one of the least likely spots. Again, they have just a 20.5 implied team total. The Texans are no joke. This is a really, really strong defense. So I'm not expecting a big game from Justin Herbert. Again, I think he has the highest upside, probably has the highest floor on the slate also. So I have no issue with him being the chalkiest quarterback on the slate. I do think, if he comes in at 30% ownership, I'd be totally fine with that. Again, it's only 4 quarterbacks on the slate. That's not that much higher than average. I think that he is a really strong play if he does come in at 30% ownership. As it gets higher, I probably am still going to limit myself to around 30%. I don't think I want much more than that of Justin Herbert. But I think you can make a case for just playing all of the Justin Herbert if he does come in at this number. I think I like him better than my initial take. I think as I'm thinking about it more, like that is just too close to the others. If he does come in at 30% ownership. So yeah, he probably will be the quarterback that I play the most of. My guess is that I get somewhere between 30 and 40% Justin Herbert. If you want to just go all in because he has the highest upside on the slate and the highest floor, and you just want to lean in on the best quarterback play on the slate, I think that's fine. He's only 6,000, which is, easy to fit in on this slate. We don't have a ton of pay up options that we love. So I think Justin Herbert, probably the best quarterback play on the slate. CJ Stroud, a little bit tougher for me. Now, you do get a $700 price savings on Justin Herbert, but neither team has a great offensive line, and CJ Stroud also dealing with a really tough matchup against the Chargers, and I think just not as talented as Justin Herbert. If he comes in as the second chalkiest quarterback on the slate, which is my expectation, I think I do end up a little bit underweight on CJ Stroud. Again, just tough matchup, not a great offensive line. He's 5,300. Sure, I think he can get it done, but I think he is the not extremely likely to. I think Justin Herbert just a bit more likely than CJ Stroud to put up a big score. So in a tough matchup, I don't have a ton of interest in CJ Stroud. So I think in that first game, I'll probably be with the field, maybe even overweight on Justin Herbert. And my guess is that I come in a bit underweight on CJ Stroud because I do have interest in the quarterbacks in the second game, the backups coming in that not a lot of the field are going to get to. So I suspect I'll be pretty well under the field on CJ Stroud. If he comes in at 25% ownership or so, and here he's projected for 21.5. I've seen him projected higher elsewhere. So that's why I'm talking about it like it might be higher. It's because this is lower than I've seen. I've seen kind of, closer to 30% elsewhere on CJ Stroud, where it's kind of these two in the first game getting most of the ownership. And I would rather, if that happens, I'd rather get away from some of that Stroud exposure, maybe play more like 10 to 15% and get more exposure to the quarterbacks in the second game. Malik Willis is 5,000. And again, depending where you look, elsewhere I've seen him projected for about 25% ownership. If he comes in at 25% or so, I think I'll be underweight on Malik Willis. Now, I do think he's looked better this year than he did at the start of his career with the Titans. He kind of looked like he was going to be a pretty big bust for a little bit, but he's looked better with the Packers. He's actually played pretty strong. Reports coming out today that NFL teams are going to be looking at him as their future quarterback after the year. I still think that this is a really tough matchup for Malik Willis. So if he gets 25% ownership, I think I do come in underweight there. Because I'd rather play the less contrarian Tyler Huntley. But you can make a strong case for Malik Willis. Again, he's looked really good in his starts for the Packers this year. He's running a bit. Looking at his career game logs, just looking at the rushing. I mean, in 2022, as a rookie, he had a couple games where he 40 or more rushing yards. 2023 didn't get any starts. 2024, he actually had a game with 73 rushing yards last year in one of his starts, 41 in one as well. Has shown some of that upside. And then on the 20th, he had a 44 rushing yard game. So he definitely has some rushing ability that does, bodes well for Malik Willis as a fantasy quarterback. I don't love the matchup with the Ravens, though. I think that it is one of the, it's a relatively tough matchup. There was a little while where you could attack the Ravens. A lot of their defensive players were out. Their defense is pretty healthy at this point, so I just don't really want to attack the Ravens with the backup quarterback. Even though he can run a bit, I'm not going to be, trying to get well overweight on Malik Willis, who again, other places projecting for more like 25% ownership. 19% I think is totally fine. That's probably close to where I'd like to be on Malik Willis, but he probably comes in a bit higher than this 19% projected ownership. So then, as you may guess, Tyler Huntley is a quarterback that I think I'm going to be taking a stand on. I'm going to be getting overweight on Tyler Huntley. Now, he is 4,800, and the knock on Tyler Huntley is he projects the worst, and again, elsewhere he projects even worse than this, and you don't really need the price savings. He's only $200 cheaper than Malik Willis, $500 cheaper than CJ Stroud, $1,200 than Justin Herbert, and we don't have much to pay up for on this slate. So from that perspective, the pricing is not really the reason to love Tyler Huntley. Now, you can get to some lineups with him that you can't get with other quarterbacks. But what I really love about Tyler Huntley is the running upside, and the matchup. First of all, looking at the rushing in 2024 and 2025, he started 5 games in 2024. He had 40 yards, then just 7, 20, 52, and 16. So 2 of his 5 starts, he had 40 or more rushing yards. And then this year already 39 yards, and then 53 yards in a start already on the season, in his only start on the season. So Tyler Huntley has shown a pretty big ability to run. This year actually better than Lamar Jackson, I think, who has just not been running as much as he's been dealing with injuries. So pretty promising to see Tyler Huntley rush for 39 and 53 yards in 2 games already on the season. And again, just one start on the year, and he had 53 rushing yards in that game. So love that for Tyler Huntley. And then on top of that, as mentioned, this is the best matchup for quarterbacks on this 2-game slate. It's the 13th best in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed over the past 5 weeks. But now they're also without Micah Parsons. He's been out for a couple games now, but Packers at one point were a defense that we really feared. I think at this point, without Micah Parsons, it just gets way easier for quarterbacks to beat the Packers. So with the rushing upside and the matchup with the Packers, I actually think Tyler Huntley is a really interesting play. Again, just 4,800, which the price savings don't do much for you, but they do help a bit. And then on top of that, I just think that he has it within his range of outcomes to just be straight up the highest scoring quarterback on the slate. I think it's not even that unlikely for Tyler Huntley to be the highest scoring quarterback on the slate, because I think that it's possible for both Justin Herbert and CJ Stroud to kind of fail in this game environment where it could be a really low scoring game. In the first one, again, both have pretty bad offensive lines, both going up against really tough defenses, and you see that reflected in the game total. The Packers have a 21 point total. The Ravens have 17.5. So that second game, the total is actually not that much lower in the second game than the first. And the quarterbacks in the first are getting more ownership. They are more expensive. So ultimately, I do think I'm going to lean on Tyler Huntley and be kind of significantly overweight there. So overall, I think I probably will get to the most exposure to Justin Herbert. I think for me, Tyler Huntley is actually going to be number 2. I think he'll be that much overweight on Tyler Huntley. And then it's probably CJ Stroud followed by Malik Willis. It's not going to be a situation where I'm playing a ton more of any one quarterback than the others. Like I don't think I get to 40% exposure to any quarterback on the slate. So it's going to be kind of a tight band, but I do think I'll be taking kind of micro stands by playing Tyler Huntley as my second highest exposed quarterback on the slate. I think in a single entry, I probably start with Justin Herbert, but I think Tyler Huntley might be the second quarterback that I would consider in a single entry, to get a little bit contrarian. At running back, in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs over the past 5 weeks, Josh Jacobs and the Packers have the 10th best matchup against Baltimore. Omari and Hampton and the Chargers have the 13th best matchup for running backs against Houston. Derrick Henry and the Ravens have the 30th best matchup against the Packers. And then finally, the Houston running backs have the worst matchup for running backs schedule adjusted over the past 5 weeks. I'm going to do running backs team by team, starting at the top in terms of salary with Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry projected for just over 14 fantasy points. That is the highest projection of any running back on the slate. He's also getting 58.5% ownership. That is the highest projected ownership of any running back on the slate. Derrick Henry, I expect the Ravens, although I do like Huntley, I do expect the Ravens to lean on Derrick Henry and the running backs a little bit more. So I think that this 58.5% ownership is totally fine, maybe even light. I like Derrick Henry quite a bit now. Obviously not really involved in the passing game. If we look over the past 4 games, just 3 total targets on 20.8% route participation for Derrick Henry. So you don't love that on a full PPR site. Obviously that limits his upside somewhat, but I think Derrick Henry is maybe the likeliest running back of any on this slate to get the 100-yard bonus, get 100 yards and a touchdown, where it can pay off that salary in a big way. So I do like Derrick Henry just fine at 58.5% ownership. I don't think that I like him better than this. I think that's kind of efficient about where I'd like to be with Derrick Henry. Beyond Derrick Henry on the Ravens, we have Keaton Mitchell and Rasheen Ali. And Keaton Mitchell, people noticed that in the most recent Ravens game, Derrick Henry didn't really run the ball at all. Like in the second half of the fourth quarter, he was doing great, kind of crushing, and everybody's expecting him to come back in and he didn't come back in late in the game. And we got some coach speak about that after the game last week. So on the 21st, in the post-game presser, head coach John Harbaugh was asked about why Derrick Henry wasn't in the game for the penultimate drive. He said it was part of a rotation. He was going to go back in the game, but we got stopped. We're rotating those guys, Henry and Keaton Mitchell, throughout the game as two backs. But do I want Derrick Henry on the field for a game-winning drive? Sure, I do want him on the field. On the 22nd, Harbaugh said, we have a rotation at running back. The rotation is Derrick Henry and Keaton Mitchell as our first and second down backs. We came to that in the last few weeks. The rotation was 2-1. The last series yesterday was a conversation between Derrick Henry and the running back coach, and they decided that Keaton was going to start the series off and Derrick would come in. Looking back, I would have grabbed it and said to put Derrick in the game. On the 23rd, offensive coordinator Todd Monken said, we've gotten Keaton Mitchell more involved and we want to get him more involved. I think that's a good thing for us. It keeps Derrick Henry fresh. So they say they've, kind of decided on a 2-1 rotation. And that's exactly what we got in terms of carries in the most recent game. Derrick Henry had 18 carries to Keaton Mitchell's 9. So exactly 2-1. So Keaton Mitchell is somewhat involved on the ground. He also was not targeted in that game. Neither of them was. He did run more routes than Derrick Henry in that game, 27.3% route participation to Derrick Henry's 18.2. If we look at the last 4 games for the Ravens, Keaton Mitchell also not that involved though through the air. So Derrick Henry, 20.8% route participation, 3 targets over the past 4 games. Keaton Mitchell does have 1 more target, but just 15.8% route participation. So it doesn't seem they're really trying to give Keaton Mitchell that different of a role, that much better of a role in the passing game. He is kind of just the 1 to 2 rotation guy in a running split that doesn't really involve the passing game. And Keaton Mitchell at 4,700, projected for about 6 fantasy points, is projected to get double-digit ownership. I typically love backup running backs on short slates, particularly showdown. I think he's fine at this 11.4% ownership, but it's not a spot that I really want to lean into. I like that he does have some standalone role, and as usual, he has contingent upside if anything were to happen to Derrick Henry. So I think, again, I do think that this ownership is fine. I think it's totally fine that he's getting double-digit ownership on a slate where we don't have a ton to be confident. I like the 11.47%. I think that's totally reasonable, but not a spot that I think I'm going to be playing well overweight on that or anything. I think it's kind of like, yeah, I'll get there. I probably don't do too much more with Keaton Mitchell than that 11.4% exposure. But I do kind of have more interest in Rasheen Ali. He's 4,200, getting 1% ownership. And looking at the last 4 games with Justice Hill out, it's been Rasheen Ali kind of taking over that Justice Hill role. He has 7 targets over the past 4 games, so under 2 targets per game. But he is running 40% of routes over that span as well. And Justice Hill, if we look at him historically, and I just pulled up 2024 fantasy point score. This is the weekly fantasy point scored report from 2024 for the Ravens. Justice Hill is pretty hit or miss. His fantasy points would come in bunches, which is exactly what you expect for a back with that third down role. In week 1, 11.5 fantasy points for Justice Hill, 21.6 in week 4, 13.8 in week 7, 14.2 in week 12, 17.8 in week 15. So he had several of those pretty big spike weeks, intermixed with several games where it was 3.5, 1.4, 2.9. And we've kind of seen the lows for Rasheen Ali. We haven't really seen the big spike weeks yet, but I have to imagine if he's continuing to play that Justice Hill role, it's more likely than what the ownership would indicate. I think people are kind of seeing him as a backup running back who has a worse role than Keaton Mitchell, because we've seen a little bit more from Keaton Mitchell. But I actually think that Rasheen Ali is kind of a sneaky play here at 4,200. Again, not getting any ownership. I don't think it's likely that he has a spike week, but I think, again, looking at Justice Hills, he had about 5 spike weeks last year in 17 games played. If you think that Rasheen Ali has maybe a 1 in 3 chance of having one of those spike weeks where he gets to double-digit fantasy points, then I think he's a really strong play at 1%. And with Justice Hill, we actually saw multiple games that were even better than that: 14.2, 17.8, 21.6. So he had several pretty big spike weeks last year. And I think that is, within the range of outcomes for Rasheen Ali, that he could have one of those big double-digit fantasy point games, and he's just going to get 1% ownership. So even if you think he's not as good as Justice Hill, and they don't trust him as much, and he's less likely to have a spike week than that, even if he has, a 1 in 10 week, 1 in 10 weeks he'll have one of those spike weeks, he's still a really strong play at 1% ownership, because I would tell you he has about a 10% chance of, having a big spike week. And again, he's only getting 1% ownership. So I really like Rasheen Ali as a large field draw throw, just for the largest field contest on DraftKings. If he's going to get 1% ownership, I'm going to be maybe I'll be 10x the field on Rasheen Ali. I might play 10% and just hope that this is one of those games where they have to, rely on Rasheen Ali for a couple drives. Maybe they have a 2-minute drill, at the end of a quarter, and he ends up getting targeted 3-4 times, and picking up some yards. And if he scores a touchdown, we're money. I will say I particularly like Rasheen Ali if the running backs in the first game don't have huge games, because then I think he has the possibility of, getting to 12 fantasy points, which is not a ton, and it's well within his range of outcomes, and that being good enough to be one of the top 2 running backs on the slate. I think in that case, I like him even better than if we get big scores from the running backs in the first game, and like, 11, 12 fantasy points isn't going to be enough, then I don't like him quite as much. But if we, kind of get duds from the running backs in the first game, then I might swap on to even more Rasheen Ali, because then I think he doesn't have as much of a barrier to be one of the top running backs on the slate. And it's, an even more realistic outcome for him, if all we need from him is 11, 12 fantasy points, as opposed to, 17, 18. Then you've got Josh Jacobs at 7,000. Projects a little bit worse than Derrick Henry, also getting slightly lesser ownership. But Josh Jacobs not on the injury report, so we don't have to worry about him not playing. Obviously, something could happen where we get bad news tomorrow, but he's not even on the injury report after being questionable and not practicing at all last week. He's been limited in practice this week. So I'm at least hopeful that Josh Jacobs is going to be more of a full-time player this week than he was last week. Last week, Josh Jacobs came in after not practicing all week, and there was a real question about whether he was going to play in that game. There were reports coming out that he wasn't going to play, and then of course he did. But he ended up being in a split last week where he had just 12 carries to Emmanuel Wilson's 14. He played fewer snaps than Emmanuel Wilson, 38.6% of snaps to Emmanuel Wilson's 45.7. Ran fewer routes, all of that. So he just did not play as a full-time player last week after not practicing and seemingly really limited with a knee injury. This week, though, he did get in limited practices. He's not even on the injury report. I think that all of that is a positive sign for Josh Jacobs potentially taking on, kind of closer to his regular role. Maybe even does get back to his full-time regular role as a bell cow running back. Looking at the last 4 weeks in total, which includes that last week where he was kind of limited, 61 carries for Josh Jacobs, just over 15 per game, plus 8 targets, so 2 targets per game. And I think the role is actually better than the 15 and 2 would indicate, because again, he was pretty limited last week and he's been sort of hurt for a while. Now, is he going to get back to his role from earlier in the season where he was very live to get, 20, 22 carries in any given game? I don't know. I think Emmanuel Wilson maybe has done well enough that the Packers are going to continue to give Emmanuel Wilson some workload. And maybe this is close to what we can expect from Josh Jacobs, or just slightly better than this. But on a 2-game slate, that is fairly strong. And again, this is, at least on paper, the best matchup of any running back on the slate, 10th best schedule adjusted over the past 5 weeks. So Josh Jacobs looks like a strong play. Emmanuel Wilson, 5,500, projected for about 5 fantasy points, 8% ownership. It's one of those situations where we don't really know how healthy Josh Jacobs is, what the split might look like. Again, just looking at last week, Emmanuel Wilson actually outcarried Josh Jacobs with 14 carries, ran 26% of the routes. So if you think that it's going to be closer to last week, then yeah, at 5,500, he seems like a fine play, and with the ownership, actually a fairly strong contrarian play. I suspect it's going to be Josh Jacobs kind of taking back his role as the primary running back on the Packers. But I think Emmanuel Wilson, is going to have some role, probably has some contingent upside. I'm not really enthusiastic where I'm going to get a ton more than this 8%. I do think I'll have him in my player pool on this 2-game slate in a 150 set, but not like a huge priority for me. More like, play close to the field, somewhere between 5-10% on Emmanuel Wilson. I think Chris Brooks, I don't think we really need to consider him. He is 4,000. That's the best thing he has going for him is the minimum price tag, but he just doesn't project that well. I think it's pretty unlikely that he has any kind of meaningful role. Omarion Hampton, 6,300, projected for about 14 fantasy points, 48% ownership. So actually projects better than Josh Jacobs. A little bit lower ownership on Omarion Hampton. The matchup, not a bad one, at least on paper, which kind of surprised me. I thought this Texans defense, it's a pretty tough defense, but it's actually been a slightly better than neutral matchup for running backs in terms of schedule adjusted over the past 5 weeks. The role has gotten a little bit better every week for Omarion Hampton. Last week, 16 carries plus 2 targets on 33% route participation. Talented running back. I would expect his role to continue to grow. We also have Kamani Vidal is questionable coming into this one, hasn't been practicing. I think there's a real shot that Kamani Vidal misses this game, in which case I would expect Omarion Hampton's role to grow even more than where it is right now. So ultimately, I think Omarion Hampton, probably my second favorite running back on the slate after Derrick Henry, maybe even my favorite when you factor in the price. I think Omarion Hampton, very strong play. I do like him a little bit better than Josh Jacobs. I don't think I'm going to anybody else on the Chargers at running back. I think Kamani Vidal, again, is questionable. 4,800. The role has been shrinking, getting double-digit ownership. I don't think I get there. Hassan Haskins, if Kamani Vidal is out, you could think about it as, kind of a goal line. He can, maybe steal a goal line carry or two, but I don't think I get to any Chargers running back outside of Omarion Hampton on the main slate. I guess Hassan Haskins would be somebody that I might consider on the showdown slate. On that note, by the way, I think Rasheen Ali, a fantastic showdown play. Also, Keaton Mitchell, probably better on showdown than the main slate. And finally, the Texans get Woody Marks back for this one. He is 6,000, projected for about 10 fantasy points, 33% ownership. The role prior to missing last week with an injury, Woody Marks over his prior 3 games had 52 carries. So fairly strong role there for Woody Marks, on top of 5 targets on 34.6% route participation. The clear lead back on the Texans in his most recent 3 games. The matchup, of course, not great for Woody Marks. It is the worst possible matchup, schedule adjusted over the past 5 weeks. So that's kind of the downside to Marks. He is my least favorite of these top 4 of the starting running backs on the slate. I suspect I come in a bit underweight on Woody Marks just because it is such a tough matchup. But, might not need to do that much to be one of the top 2 running backs on the slate. Is somewhat involved in the passing game, and has had a fairly strong workload again over the past 3 games. 52 carries, just over 17 carries per game over that stretch for Woody Marks, and then just under 2 targets. And then beyond Woody Marks, I mean, Jawar Jordan seems like a fine play. Also, in that game without Woody Marks, Jawar Jordan had 15 carries along with 5 targets on 27.8% route participation. So, better usage in the passing game than we've really seen from Woody Marks recently, and again was able to take 15 carries as well. So with Woody Marks, potentially coming back somewhat injured, Jawar Jordan over his past 2 games, 30 carries, so he had 15 in the other one as well, 7 total targets. Kind of a good enough player, had at least one breakaway run over that span. So a 5,300 projected for 1% ownership. I think Jawar Jordan is in play for large field GPPs. I'd probably go there. I'd probably rather go there than Nick Chubb. I don't think I get to Nick Chubb. I think Jawar Jordan is kind of borderline in play at running back. Maybe in a 150 set. Probably wouldn't get there in 20 lineups like I would with Rasheen Ali, but probably in a 150 set, I might have some exposure to Jawar Jordan. So again, in terms of my exposure, how I expect it to break down, it would be Derrick Henry number 1, Omarion Hampton number 2, Josh Jacobs number 3, Woody Marks number 4, and then Rasheen Ali is probably number 5 for me in terms of what I expect my exposure to be at the running back position. And then maybe I'll have a smattering of some other players like Emmanuel Wilson, Jawar Jordan, but I don't expect to have that much outside of those top 5. See, these 4, of course, will get the most, and then Rasheen Ali, probably my favorite of the secondary running backs on this slate. At wide receiver, the Ravens have the 9th best matchup in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed over the past 5 weeks. The Packers have the 10th best matchup, so both have positive matchups in the second game of the night. The first game of the night, a little bit tougher. The Texans look like they have about the maybe 12th or 13th worst matchup for wide receivers over the past 5 weeks. And then the Chargers have the fourth worst matchup for wide receivers over the past 5 weeks. So again, much easier matchups for the wide receivers in the night game than the early game. I'm again going to go team by team here, starting at the top with Nico Collins and the Texans. Nico Collins projected for 15.45 fantasy points, 66% projected ownership at 7,400. Over the past 4 weeks, Nico Collins leads the Texans with 30 targets on 85.7% route participation. That's 7.5 targets per game for Nico Collins. Given the matchup, I certainly don't think this is a can't fail spot for Nico Collins. I wouldn't be surprised if there are 3 or 4 wide receivers that outscore him. He is, I would say, the likeliest receiver on the slate to have 20 plus fantasy points, probably the likeliest to have 15 plus fantasy points. But still, it's maybe not even 50% likely that he reaches that number, and that he is a top 3 receiver on the slate. So I actually expect that I will be underweight on Nico Collins. Maybe I'll leave some salary on the table in some lineups because although he has the best odds of a big score, certainly no guarantee that he puts up a big score, given the tough matchup here, the low implied team total, all of that. So I think he's a strong play, but I my guess is that I come in a bit underweight on 66% because we have a lot of reasonable wide receiver plays on the slate that I think could reasonably beat out Nico Collins. So ultimately, I think I'll probably be a bit underweight on Nico Collins. And then beyond Nico Collins, on the Texans, it's been Jaden Higgins as the wide receiver too. It's been Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz leading in terms of route participation. Jaden Higgins third in route participation each of the past 5 weeks for the Texans. So it's held 5 weeks straight that Jaden Higgins has been third on the team in route participation. Ultimately, that role hasn't been amazing. It's still over the past 4 weeks, just 14 targets for Jaden Higgins. So under 4 targets per game, 60% route participation, but he's not going to get a ton of ownership. Jaden Higgins is 4,000 projected for just under 10% ownership. So I think he's actually a relatively strong play at 4,000 as a price saver. I like Jaden Higgins. He's somebody that I'll definitely be probably double the field. Maybe I'll have 20% or so of Jaden Higgins. I think he's a talented receiver. And again, he's not extremely likely to put up a big score, but with his role increasing over time, the price tag, the low ownership, I do like Jaden Higgins better than the field. On the full 2-game slate, there's nobody else that I have a ton of interest in. I think Christian Kirk is playable as the primary slot receiver. 55.6% route participation in the most recent game is better than he had been in quite a while. So maybe the role is expanding somewhat for Christian Kirk. I think Xavier Hutchinson is not running enough routes to really be playable on the 2-game slate, or not somebody I want much exposure to, at least. Jalen Noel just down to 17% route participation. So it's really, for me, it's Nico Collins and Jaden Higgins on the Texans. You can play a little bit of Christian Kirk. I think you can make a case. I'll probably have a little bit of exposure to Christian Kirk, but even he, just 7 targets over those 4 games, despite running 45.7% of the routes. I think the strongest case for Christian Kirk is just that the role has gone up and he's kind of gapped the rest of the Texans. But we have not seen that great of a role anyway. So it's going to be mostly Collins and Higgins for me, and then maybe just a bit of Kirk and probably none of the other receivers on the Texans. On the Ravens, you've got Zay Flowers and then an enormous gap before the rest of the receivers. Zay Flowers projected for 12.5 fantasy points, about 59% ownership. Again, I think he's a strong play. One of the better projected, the second best projected wide receiver on the slate. So I'll have a fair amount of Zay Flowers. My guess is that I come in close to the field because I'm also playing a fair amount of Tyler Huntley. I like the matchup with the Packers, who are going to be without Micah Parsons, all of that. So I do like Zay Flowers. I don't think I'm going to have more than this. Certainly, I wouldn't be surprised if I have slightly less than this of Zay Flowers. But because of my interest in Huntley, I'll probably be pretty close to the field on Zay Flowers, despite thinking he is somewhat overowned. We did see Huntley after Huntley came in last week. That was when Zay Flowers kind of started to have a bigger game. He scored the touchdown after Huntley came in. So I don't think that this is necessarily a death knell for Zay Flowers. Now, we did see kind of the big dip earlier in the season where he was really good with Lamar Jackson to start, and then Lamar Jackson got hurt, and we didn't see much from Zay Flowers after that. So I think it's very, very live that he does not have a big game. I want to be clear about that. Probably the second likeliest on the slate to, again, get to 10, 15 fantasy points, but still not especially likely. In terms of route participation, Zay Flowers at 95.5% route participation last week, and then a huge gap down to Rashad Bateman was at 68.2%. Looking at the usage over the past 4 games, Zay Flowers again has 30 targets. So it's again 7.5 targets per game. And then big gap down to the next wide receiver is DeAndre Hopkins. And then again, Rashad Bateman, 6 targets in 3 games over that 4-game span. On the 22nd, head coach John Harbaugh was asked why it's been so difficult to get Rashad Bateman involved. He said, "The way the games go, you can't control where the ball goes as a coach. Even as a play caller, you can't control that. I was really impressed with the way Rashad played. I think he deserves the ball more. There's no doubt. He's running really good routes and he's blocking really well, which you appreciate. We want the ball to go his way. It's challenging. We're going to try to get him the ball. The ball's going to go his way." On the 23rd, offensive coordinator Todd Monken said, "We've had DeAndre Hopkins in the game plan for a number of weeks. Sometimes the ball doesn't find him. Sometimes it does. Sometimes coverage dictates that. That's the same with Rashad Bateman. We'd love to get Bate more involved. It's nothing he's doing. He's blocking his rear end off. He's all in. I'm so fired up for him coming back from the ankle." Bateman again running 68% of routes in the most recent game, and that was less than he had been running in his 2 previous healthy weeks. He was up over 75%. Bateman at 3,400, coming in at just 3.7% ownership. DeAndre Hopkins 3,100, coming in at 2% ownership. I think I like both of them better than anybody outside of Collins and Higgins on the Texans. I think both are like relatively strong dart throws, even with Tyler Huntley. Bateman, we saw him have the big game, the big year last year. Big kind of a down year for Rashad Bateman. Hopkins has made some really big plays this year. Overall, not the best year. So both are still just kind of dart throws, but at these price tags and ownership numbers, I actually think Bateman and Hopkins are both fairly strong dart throws on the 2-game slate and certainly in the showdown slate also. Both live to just score a touchdown, and it's enough to pay off their price tags, run enough routes, and then again, the coach speak says Bateman is going to get the ball his way at some point. This seems like as good of a week as any. A little bit more time for the passing plays to develop with no Micah Parsons here. So I do like both Bateman and Hopkins as dart throws. I think my preference would be Bateman just because he is running the more routes, a little bit more likely to see more volume. But Hopkins always a touchdown magnet. So I think both are relatively strong dart throws for large field tournaments. On the Chargers, we have kind of 4 receivers we can consider with Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, and Trey Harris. Starting with Ladd McConkey, he is 6,200, projected for about 35% ownership. Looking at the route share report, leads the team by far in terms of routes, 91% routes in the most recent game. Over the past 4, though, it's actually Keenan Allen leads Ladd McConkey in targets, 22. Ladd McConkey's 19 targets over the past 4 games. So under 5 targets per game, despite running 89% of routes. That's not great for Ladd McConkey. Not actually a great role, and now has a tough matchup again, the 4th worst in terms of schedule adjusted. So I think it makes sense that there's kind of a big gap down in projected ownership from Nico Collins and Zay Flowers to Ladd McConkey. Again, it's a tough enough matchup that I don't really see myself getting above the field here. I think I'm often going to be leaving salary on the table and playing more of the cheaper options on this one. Quentin Johnston, 5,200, projected for about 27% ownership. Love the big play upside for Quentin Johnston. Just can make splash plays and pay off that $5,200 price tag. Again, looking at the past 4 weeks for Quentin Johnston, he's only played 3 of those games, just under 4 targets per game on 80.4% route participation. Hadn't had a great role early in the year. Had a big game last week. Maybe they're starting to groove again. So I think Quentin Johnston, totally fine play at 27% ownership. Not somebody I'd expect to have any more than that. Keenan Allen, 4,700, projected for 22% ownership. Again, he has more targets than Ladd McConkey over the past 4 weeks. 5 targets per game for Keenan Allen over that span. Now, I will say the route participation has decreased every week since their week 12 bye. Started out with 82.1% in week 13, and then it's been down 73, then 58, then 52. So decreasing every week over the past 4. So I think it probably stays a little bit lower. We've seen Trey Harris kind of get that Rookie kind of usage increase over time. Week 15, 76%, then went back down to 52%. Kind of inconsistent, kind of hard to predict. I guess that was with Quentin Johnston out in week 15 for Trey Harris, but then he kind of held on to some of that role, and Keenan Allen and Trey Harris both lost some of their role. So it seems the team likes Trey Harris enough to keep him involved, which is probably going to limit the upside for Keenan Allen. But I would say I like Keenan Allen as a play just from a PPR standpoint. Can rack up a lot of receptions in a game. If he scores a touchdown, pretty likely to pay off that $47 price tag and only 22% ownership, so a little bit lighter than Quentin Johnston. So Keenan Allen definitely in play despite the tough matchup. I will also note, it was just tweeted out by DraftKings themselves that Keenan Allen is 7 receptions from a $750,000 bonus this year, 26 receiving yards from a $250,000 bonus. So it is possible that they want to get him that bonus. This is not the final week of the season, though, so I don't know how much that really factors in this week. Finally, Trey Harris, 3,300, projected for 14% ownership, was right at 51% route participation last week. In a vacuum, I just prefer Jaden Higgins if I'm going to one of these rookies. Jaden Higgins running more routes, getting lower ownership than Trey Harris. Now he doesn't have Justin Herbert throwing in the ball, so not as strong of a situation from that standpoint. But because Jaden Higgins has the better role and the lower ownership, I do prefer him if I'm as far as dart throw rookies go. But I think Trey Harris also very much in play. 16 targets over the past 4 weeks, 4 targets per game on 48% route participation. That does include that one game without Quentin Johnston that we saw a bigger role for Trey Harris. But again, the role, he kind of held on to it with Quentin Johnston back in week 16. So Trey Harris in play. And I think 14% ownership, probably fine, probably not something that I'm really getting above weight there. Finally, the Packers, Christian Watson is 5,000. Romeo Dobbs, 4,900. Watson projected for 37% ownership. Dobbs at 23% ownership. Then we have Jaden Reed is 4,500, projected for 28% ownership. Matthew Golden, 3,800. Dontavian Wicks, 3,600, both getting about 1% ownership. Now, Jaden Reed came back in week 14, his first game in several weeks. So I'm going to pull up just the most recent 3 games for the Packers. It's been a fairly even split. Christian Watson, 15 targets on 58.3% route participation. Jaden Reed, 13 targets on 72% route participation. Romeo Dobbs, 11 targets on 67% route participation. It's kind of the same mess we dealt with all of last year for the Packers, where they don't really have a clear wide receiver one. We've got Golden with 5 targets, Wicks with 4 targets over the past 3 games. So just not really involved all that much. So really the interest for me is just kind of the top 3, Watson, Reed, and Dobbs. I think my favorite of the group would be Reed. Again, fewer targets than Watson, but he is running more routes. That does include Watson got hurt mid-game in week 15, but Reed was, kind of catching up, or immediately ran 65.4% of routes in week 14, I should say. So he was behind Watson. Week 15, we saw a slight increase for Reed. That's when Watson got hurt. And then week 16, Reed was still at 84%, Watson at 68%. So I guess it's not really clear. Maybe this was Watson. He had been questionable coming back from injury. Maybe we can expect that role to increase. Not really obvious to me who is going to be running the most routes, seeing the most opportunities. I think both are very talented receivers, but I think, Reed and Watson to me are the 2 favorites of the Packers receivers. Reed, though, the cheapest and getting lower ownership. So all things considered, I'd say Reed is my favorite of the Packers receivers, followed by Watson, who does have that Q tag, and then Dobbs. I mean, we saw him, he had the connection with Malik Willis at the end of the last game, scored a big touchdown when it mattered. He's 4,900, projected for 23% ownership, I think is in play. I don't really think on the 2-game slate we have to consider Wicks or Golden too much. 1% ownership. If you want to take a dart throw in a 150 set, I think it's reasonable. You're kind of just hoping for a big play and a touchdown. Neither actually has a particularly strong role. So as far as roles go, again, it's Reed for me, my favorite, given the role and the ownership and the price, followed by Watson, followed by Dobbs, and then it would probably be Wicks for me. Golden, kind of a distant long shot, who I'm probably not even going to get to on the 2-gamer. More like a showdown play. I think I would consider Golden and Wicks better showdown plays. At tight end, Dalton Schultz has the 12th best matchup for tight ends in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position over the past 5 weeks. Oronde Gadsden has the 13th best matchup for tight ends over the past 5 weeks. Then a below average matchup for Luke Musgrave and also for Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely. 12th worst matchup for Musgrave, 10th worst matchup for Andrews and Likely. Schultz, the best role of any tight end on this slate. He's also getting the most ownership, 40% projected ownership. He's 4,200 over the past 5 weeks. As I mentioned, Jaden Higgins third on the team in route participation. Dalton Schultz has been in the top 2 in each of those games, sometimes running more routes than Nico Collins. Really strong role from that perspective. And then in terms of actual role, also 18 targets over the past 3 games for Dalton Schultz, 84.5% route participation. So tough to argue that he shouldn't be the highest owned tight end on the slate. 40% seems totally fine to me for Dalton Schultz. Oronde Gadsden, 3,900 projected for 22% ownership. We had a real big spike in the middle of the year for Oronde Gadsden. He's been pretty quiet recently, though. Over the past 3 weeks, just 10 targets for Gadsden on 65.4% route participation. I do think he showed enough talent in the middle of the year that, again, I think the 22% ownership is fine. I don't have any real issue with it. I probably come in overweight there because I do think he's my second favorite tight end on this slate. But I'm not going to come that much overweight there. It's just been a while since we've seen much from Gadsden. Although that is these two have the better matchups. So probably the priorities on this slate are Schultz and Gadsden, with Schultz being the bigger priority. On the Packers, Luke Musgrave kind of seemed to take over that top tight end role, 74% route participation in week 16. Musgrave projected for about 15% ownership. Totally fine play at 15% ownership. Now, his role, again, has not been all that great. If we just look at the most recent 3 games for the Packers, Musgrave, 13 targets, just over 4 targets per game on 53% route participation. But the fact that it was so much better in the most recent game really does make Musgrave look like a fairly strong play. Probably the 3rd best tight end play on the slate. And honestly, more targets than Gadsden. If you want to make the argument that he's even better, I think that is valid. Not a great matchup, though. So I think I probably put Musgrave after the top 2 in terms of tight end plays. And then finally, Andrews and Likely actually ran more routes than Andrews in that most recent game, 50% to Mark Andrews' 45.5. So neither of them get in full-time roles, but Andrews 3,700 projected for 28% ownership, Likely 3,200 projected for 19% ownership. I think I come in underweight on Andrews just given that the role is seemingly decreasing. They're out of the playoffs, maybe trying to see what they have in the young guys a little bit more. So I'm not super high on Andrews. I would say I like him less than all of Schultz, Gadsden, Musgrave, and Likely. I'll certainly still have exposure to Mark Andrews, but maybe closer to 15%, and I'll probably be a bit overweight on Isaiah Likely at 19%, just thinking they're maybe kind of seeing what they have. He's been on the team for a while, so maybe they don't need to see what they have in him, but they've been giving him a bigger role. Again, 50% of the routes in the most recent game. So I think Isaiah Likely is a slight preference for me over Mark Andrews, but I do like the Ravens tight ends the least of the tight ends on this slate. Maybe surprising, just given that they have 2 name brand tight ends, but I think I'd rank them Schultz number 1, Gadsden number 2, Musgrave number 3, Likely, and then Andrews. And then any other tight ends are just kind of dart throws. I don't really see anybody else that I have a ton of interest in on the 2 game slate. We just don't have much of a role for any other tight end on the slate. Finally, defenses. It's very ownership dependent for me, and the ownership is fairly flat. Chargers getting the most ownership. I do think that they are probably the best play on the slate, just given the offensive line woes for the Texans and how good of a defense the Chargers have. So I think it makes sense for them to be the highest owned defense on the slate. Don't mind the Ravens against Malik Willis. They're getting the lowest ownership. I don't know that they're necessarily any worse of a play than the other defenses on the slate. They're the cheapest, so I do like the Ravens a bit also, but no really strong takes at defense other than we have 2 really good defenses playing against each other in that first game. They are, again, facing starting NFL quarterbacks, so it's from that perspective not as strong, but you would expect there to be more throwing in the Houston LA game, so that's a positive for the defenses. When there's more throwing, there's typically more opportunities for turnovers, so there's kind of the argument for those 2. But then the later game, you get the backup quarterbacks, maybe more likely to make mistakes. We also have pretty good defenses there. I think the Ravens actually have a really strong defense. Packers defense, again, takes a hit with no Micah Parsons, but they're facing a backup, so not a terrible play either. I don't think I'm going to rank these defenses, but I'll just say I think I like the Ravens better than this ownership number. Like I'm certainly going to have more than 17.5% of the Ravens, but it's kind of I'll probably have somewhere in the 20 to 30% exposure to all of the defenses. Not really taking any huge stands here. I'll also note that you can certainly play your defense against your quarterback, against multiple offensive players. Not an issue at all on a 2-game slate. Well, that took a little bit longer to record than anticipated, so I am going to get out of here. But please do like the video if you could and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to join, I've got a free Discord, Flaniverse Discord. There's a link in the description of this video. Would love to have you join us there. Let me know if you have any success on this slate. I always love hearing from you guys. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to get out of here. Good luck on Saturday.